The neon sign of Miller's Diner buzzed with the rhythm of a dying heart. It was 1:55 a.m. on a Tuesday, the kind of hour when nothing good ever happens. Elenya Vance thought she was just scrubbing a coffee stain off the counter. She thought the lock on the front door was her only protection. She was wrong. When Johnny Vesper, the city's most notorious shadow, walked in, he didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He sat in booth 4, bleeding through a $3,000 suit, and said 3 words that would burn Elenya's world to the ground. Dinner for 2. But the empty seat opposite him. That was the most dangerous part of the meal. The rain in Seattle didn't wash things clean. It just made the grime slicker. Inside Miller's Diner, the air smelled of stale grease, lemon polish, and the damp wool of Elenya Vance's cardigan. Elenya wiped the Formica counter for the 3rd time, her eyes drifting to the clock. 1:58 a.m. 2 minutes until she could flip the sign to closed lock the deadbolt and take the 2 bus rides back to her studio apartment, where an eviction notice was currently serving as a coaster for her water glass. She was 26, but her eyes held the exhaustion of someone twice her age. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a fraying, messy bun, and her apron was stained with ketchup and regret. Ding! The bell above the door chimed not with a cheerful ring, but a dull, wet clatter. A gust of wind slammed into the diner, bringing the smell of ozone and wet pavement. Elenya didn't look up immediately. She scrubbed a stubborn spot of dried yolk. Kitchen's closed, hun. Only coffee and pie left. That will suffice. The voice was low, rolling like gravel in a cement mixer. It wasn't the voice of the usual drunks who stumbled in from the dive bar down the street. It was a voice that commanded silence. Elenya looked up. The man standing in the entryway was tall, his silhouette framed by the street lights reflecting off the wet asphalt outside. He wore a charcoal suit that fit him like a second skin, though the fabric was dark and heavy with rain. His hair was slicked back black as oil, and his face was a map of sharp angles and shadowed hollows. He was handsome, objectively, but in the way a wolf is beautiful, right before it tears into a deer. He walked with a slight limp favoring his left side, moving toward booth 4, the one in the far corner, away from the windows, the one with the best view of the door. Elenya sighed, dropping her rag into the sanitizer bucket. "Sir, really, I have to lock up in 2 minutes." He slid into the booth, his movements stiff. He placed a heavy platinum watch on the table, followed by a cell phone that had a spiderweb crack across the screen. "The sign says open until 2:00 a.m., he said. He didn't look at the menu. He looked at the door. "You have 60 seconds of service time remaining." Elenya walked over, pulling her order pad from her apron. Up close, he looked worse. His skin was the color of old parchment. There was a sheen of sweat on his upper lip, despite the chill in the diner. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were a piercing, unnatural, icy blue, scanning the perimeter of the empty parking lot outside the window before snapping to her face. "Coffee," Elenya said flatly. "Black coffee." He nodded. "And the meatloaf special." "I told you the grill is off. The cook went home an hour ago." The man turned his gaze to her. It felt physical, like a weight pressing on her chest. He reached into his inner jacket pocket. Elenya tensed, her breath hitching. In this neighborhood, reaching inside a jacket usually meant a robbery. Instead, he pulled out a thick stack of $100 bills. It was bound by a simple rubber band. He tossed it onto the table. It landed with a heavy thud, sliding next to the sugar dispenser. "Turn the grill back on," he said softly, "and make it dinner for 2. Elenya stared at the money. That was more than she made in 6 months. She looked at the empty seat across from him. The diner was empty. "Dinner for 2?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Is someone joining you?" The man winced, his hand subtly pressing against his left side, just above the hip. When he pulled his hand away, Elenya saw it a smear of dark crimson blood against the grey wool of his suit. "No," he whispered, his eyes glazing over for a second, before snapping back to focus. "But if I don't eat with him, he gets restless." "Who?" "My conscience." Elenya stood frozen. She should run. She should hit the silent alarm button under the counter. But the alarm didn't work. Mr. Miller was too cheap to pay the subscription fee. And if she ran, she'd never outrun a man with a stack of cash like that. "Sir, you're bleeding," she said, her voice dropping to a hush. "I am," he agreed, as if discussing the weather. "And if you call an ambulance or the police, the men who did this to me will come here. And they won't just kill me. They will burn this place down with you inside it." He looked at her, his expression devoid of malice, just stating a cold, hard fact. "My name is Johnny," he said. "Please, just make the meatloaf." Elenya didn't scream. She didn't run. Years of navigating a life where nothing ever went right had given her a strange, numb resilience. Instead, she walked to the front door, flipped the sign to "closed," and turned the deadbolt. Then she reached up and pulled the blinds down. She walked back to booth 4. Johnny Vesper watched her, his hand still clutching his side. His breathing was becoming shallow. "What are you doing?" he rasped. "If I turn the grill on, the exhaust fan gets loud." "I won't hear if someone pulls up," Elenya said calmly, surprising herself. She grabbed the stack of cash and shoved it back toward him. "Keep your blood money. I'm not cooking meatloaf. I'm getting the first aid kit." "I don't need a Band-Aid." Johnny gritted out his head, lolling back against the red vinyl seat. "I need a doctor." "You said no doctors," she countered, walking briskly behind the counter. She crouched down, bypassing the standard OSHA-compliant first aid box and reaching for a dusty grey tackle box hidden beneath the sink. It belonged to her father, a man who had spent 30 years as a combat medic before the bottle took him. She returned to the booth and slammed the box down. "Jacket off. Shirt up." Johnny looked at the box, then at her. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You're full of surprises, waitress." "Elenya," she corrected. "And if you bleed out on my floor, I lose my deposit. Move." With a groan that sounded like tearing metal, Johnny shrugged off the suit jacket. The white dress shirt underneath was soaked red from the ribs down. He unbuttoned it with shaking fingers. Elenya sucked in a breath. It was a gunshot wound. Through and through, luckily. It had entered the fleshy part of his oblique, missed the gut, and exited the back. It was messy but not instantly fatal, unless he lost too much blood. "Clean exit," she muttered, snapping on a pair of blue nitrile gloves. "You're lucky." "I make my own luck," Johnny hissed, as she poured antiseptic directly onto the wound. His body seized the muscles in his abdomen, rippling and locking tight, but he didn't cry out. He just gripped the edge of the table until his knuckles turned white. "Who shot you?" Elenya asked, threading a curved needle. She didn't look at his face. She focused on the skin, the torn flesh. It was easier to deal with the biology than the reality. "A business associate," Johnny managed, sweat dripping from his nose. "Name is Marco Rossi. He disagreed with my retirement plan." "Retirement." Elenya pierced the skin. Johnny shuddered. "I was getting out." He exhaled, his voice weak. "Tonight, I was Liquidating. Marco wanted the assets, but he didn't want me breathing. Elenya worked quickly. Her father had taught her how to stitch on raw pork loins when she was 12, tight, even secure. So the dinner for two, Elenya said, tying off the final knot on his front. Was that a celebration? Johnny looked at the empty seat. His vision was blurring. It's the anniversary, he whispered. My wife died 3 years ago tonight. We used to come here. Before I became this. Elenya paused, the scissors in her hand, hovering over the thread. She looked around the dingy diner. Here. Why? Because Johnny's eyes fluttered shut. Nobody knew us here. We were just people. Suddenly, headlights swept across the drawn blinds. Elenya dropped the scissors. The sound clattered loudly in the silence. Johnny's eyes snapped open, the haze of pain instantly replaced by the clarity of a predator. He reached for the gun tucked into his waistband, a gun Elenya hadn't noticed until now. Get down, he ordered, his voice barely a sound. Elenya slid into the booth opposite him, sliding underneath the table. Johnny slumped sideways, hiding his profile in the shadows of the booth, the gun aimed under the table toward the door. A car door slammed. Heavy boots crunched on the wet pavement. Elenya held her breath, staring at Johnny's polished shoes. She could hear the rain drumming on the roof louder now, or maybe that was just the blood rushing in her ears. Someone tried the door handle. Clack, clack. Locked. Then a fist pounded on the glass. Open up, police! Elenya's eyes widened. She looked up at Johnny. He shook his head imperceptibly. Don't trust them. We know you're in there, Vesper, the voice shouted. It wasn't a standard patrol officer's shout. It was angry, personal. Johnny leaned down, his lips inches from Elenya's ear. That's not the police, he whispered. That's Detective Holloway. He's on Marco's payroll. If you open that door, we both die. Elenya's heart hammered against her ribs. She was a waitress. She worried about tips and rent. She did not worry about corrupt cops and Mafia wars. What do we do? She mouthed. Johnny looked at the back of the diner toward the kitchen. Is there a back exit? Yes, she whispered. Through the pantry, into the alley. Go, he said. Leave me. Tell them I forced you to patch me up and ran. They'll kill you, she said. I'm a dead man anyway, Elenya. He looked at the half-empty coffee cup on the table. At least I got to order. The glass of the front door shattered. An arm reached in to unlock the deadbolt. Elenya made a choice. It was a stupid choice, the kind that gets people killed in movies, but looking at Johnny, a man who wanted to have dinner with his dead wife's memory, while bleeding out, she couldn't leave him. She grabbed his arm. Get up. Elenya. I said, get up. My dad didn't teach me how to stitch just to have the patient die 5 minutes later. She hauled him up. He was heavy, dead weight leaning on her shoulder. They stumbled toward the kitchen just as the front door swung open and rain-soaked silhouettes burst into the diner. Clear the room, a voice roared. Elenya kicked the kitchen door open, dragging Johnny into the steam and darkness of the back of the house. They scrambled past the grill, past the fryers. She shoved him toward the heavy steel door of the pantry. There's a delivery truck out back, she panted, fumbling with the keys from her pocket. It's broken down, but the cargo bay is open. We can hide. They'll check, Johnny groaned, clutching his side. Not if we go under it, she said. They burst into the cold, wet alleyway. The rain was torrential now, a blessing. It would hide their sound. Elenya dragged him toward the rusted delivery van. They slid underneath the chassis into the oil and mud just as the back door of the diner flew open. Flashlight beams cut through the rain, slicing the darkness above their heads. "He was here," a voice growled Holloway. "Blood on the table. Fresh." "Where did he go?" another man asked. "Find the girl," Holloway commanded. "She helped him. Find the girl and bleed her until she talks." Under the truck, lying in the mud next to a Mafia boss, Elenya Vance closed her eyes and realized her life as a waitress was over. She wasn't just closing the diner tonight. She was closing the door on her entire existence. The mud under the delivery truck was freezing, seeping through Elenya's thin waitress uniform until her bones felt like brittle glass. Above them, the heavy boots of Detective Holloway and his men crunched on the gravel, pacing back and forth like wolves circling a tree. "Check the dumpster," Holloway's voice grated, muffled by the rain. "And check the perimeter. If Vesper is bleeding as bad as it looks, he can't have gone far." Elenya felt Johnny's body heat next to her. It was scorching. The fever was setting in faster than she had anticipated. His hand, large and calloused, found hers in the mud. He squeezed it once hard. A silent command. "Stay still." Minutes stretched into an eternity. Eventually the footsteps retreated. Car doors slammed. Engines roared to life and faded into the hiss of the downpour. They lay there for another full minute in the silence of the alley. "Are they gone?" Elenya whispered, her teeth chattering. "For now," Johnny rasped. "But Holloway is a bloodhound. He'll circle back." Elenya shimmied out from under the chassis, first the cold air hitting her wet clothes like a slap. She reached back and grabbed Johnny's arm, hauling him out. He looked ghastly in the pale wash of the street lamp. The grey suit was ruined, caked in mud and oil, and his face was a mask of pain. "My car," Elenya said, pointing down the alley toward a dimly lit side street. "It's a piece of junk, but it runs. It's parked 3 blocks over." "Lead the way," Johnny said. He tried to stand straight, adjusting his cuffs instinctively, a flicker of his old dominance trying to push through the agony. "And Elenya, if we see a patrol car, you don't stop, even if they flash the lights." "I know," she said, supporting his weight. "You're a cop killer now. Or at least they'll say you are." They moved through the shadows, avoiding the main thoroughfares. Elenya's car was a 2008 Honda Civic, the silver paint peeling like sunburned skin. She unlocked it, shoving Johnny into the passenger seat before running to the driver's side. The engine sputtered, coughed, and finally roared to life. Elenya pulled out her hands, gripping the wheel so tight her knuckles turned white. "Where are we going?" she asked, checking the rearview mirror every 2 seconds. "My apartment is the first place they'll look if they run my plates." Johnny's head was lolling against the window. He fumbled in his pocket and pulled out a heavy set of keys with a brass tag. "Pioneer Square," he murmured. "The old textile factory on Jackson Street. Number 404, top floor." "That's downtown," Elenya argued. "There are cameras everywhere." "Not where we're going. It's a dead zone. I bought the building through a shell company in the Cayman Islands 10 years ago. It doesn't exist on paper." The drive was a blur of neon lights and rain-streaked glass. Elenya drove with a hyper-awareness she had never felt before. Every set of headlights behind them looked like Holloway's unmarked cruiser. Every siren in the distance made her heart stop. Beside her, Johnny was fading. The adrenaline of the shootout was wearing off, leaving behind the shock of blood loss. "Stay with me, Johnny," she said sharply, merging onto the highway ramp. Don't you dare die in my passenger seat. The upholstery is impossible to clean. He let out a weak, dry chuckle. You're worried about the resale value. I'm worried about explaining a dead mob boss to the impound lot. Mafia, he corrected softly. Mob is for the Irish. We have standards. You have a bullet in your side, she retorted. Your standards are currently bleeding out. They reached the textile factory 20 minutes later. It was a looming brick skeleton from the Industrial Revolution, dark and foreboding. Elenya pulled the car into the service alley Johnny indicated. He pressed a button on a remote hidden in his pocket, and a rusted rolling door groaned upward, revealing a pristine concrete garage. Elenya drove in. The door rattled shut behind them, sealing them in darkness until motion sensor lights flickered on. The garage was empty, except for a vintage black Jaguar E-Type under a dust sheet and a workbench covered in tools. "Help me up," Johnny commanded, though his voice lacked any real power. Elenya practically carried him to the freight elevator. He swiped a keycard, and the cage ascended with a mechanical whine. When the doors opened, Elenya gasped. The safe house was a penthouse loft. Exposed brick walls, floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the rain-drenched city, and furniture that looked like it cost more than Elenya's entire life earnings. But the air was stale cold and smelled of disuse. Dust motes danced in the dim light. "Bedroom." Johnny pointed to a massive steel door. "There's a medical supply drawer in the bathroom, and a safe." Elenya deposited him onto the bed, a stark white platform that looked uncomfortable, but expensive. She rushed to the bathroom, tearing open cabinets until she found what she needed: stronger, antiseptic, real surgical gauze, antibiotics, and saline bags. She returned to find Johnny trying to sit up a gun, a different one, a sleek Sig Sauer taken from the nightstand resting on his lap. "Put the gun away," Elenya said, snapping a fresh pair of gloves from the box. "I'm not going to rob you." "Habit," he muttered, but he didn't let go of the weapon. "Lie back. I need to check the stitches. The car ride probably tore them." She worked in silence for a long time. The wound was angry and inflamed, but the stitches had held. She set up a makeshift IV drip using a coat rack, sliding the needle into the vein of his hand with a precision that made Johnny watch her through narrowed, fever-bright eyes. "You're too good at this," he said, his voice barely a whisper, as the morphine she'd found began to take the edge off. "A waitress doesn't know how to set a central line." Elenya taped the IV down. She looked tired, her blonde hair falling in messy strands over her face, the blood on her apron drying into a rust-colored map of violence. "My father," she said quietly, sitting in the velvet armchair next to the bed. "He was a combat medic. Special forces. After he came back, he didn't handle civilian life well. He couldn't hold a job at a hospital. Too much red tape, so he did off-the-books work." Johnny's eyes widened slightly. "Vance," he murmured. "Doc Vance, the one who operated out of a basement in Tacoma." Elenya stiffened. "You knew him?" "He patched up my father once, 20 years ago." Johnny looked at her with a new expression, not just assessment, but recognition. "He was a legend. He could fix a collapsed lung with a ballpoint pen and a bottle of vodka." "He was a drunk," Elenya said bitterly. "And he died of liver failure 3 years ago, leaving me nothing but a tackle box and a mountain of debt." "The debt," Johnny said, his mind latching onto the detail. "Is that why you're working the night shift at Miller's? Student loans, Dad's funeral costs, and mistakes," she said vaguely. She stood up. "Rest, Johnny. I'm going to find us some food. The kitchen looks like it hasn't been stocked since the Cold War." "Elenya." She stopped at the door. "Thank you," he said. The words seemed foreign in his mouth. "Don't thank me yet," she said, looking at the rain lashing against the massive windows. "We're still trapped, and Holloway is still out there." She walked out into the massive, dark living room. She went to the window and looked down at the street 5 stories below. A black sedan was idling on the corner. The lights were off, but the engine was running. Her stomach dropped. They hadn't lost them. Elenya backed away from the window, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She moved with the silent, terrified efficiency of a prey animal that knows the predator is sniffing the air. She returned to the bedroom. Johnny was drifting the morphine, pulling him under. She shook his shoulder hard. "Johnny, wake up." His eyes snapped open, the icy blue instantly clearing of sleep. He raised the gun before he even registered who she was. "Downstairs," Elenya hissed. "Black sedan. Unmarked. They found us." Johnny cursed a string of Italian that sounded like a prayer for vengeance. He tried to sit up, but the pain slammed him back down. He groaned, squeezing his eyes shut. I can't move yet," he gritted out. "The leg, the nerve damage from the old injury, combined with the blood loss." "Then tell me what to do," Elenya said. "Do you have security cameras?" "A back way." "Tablet." He pointed to the nightstand. "Access code 1984. Check the perimeter feeds." Elenya grabbed the tablet. Her fingers trembled as she punched in the code. The screen flared to life, showing a grid of grainy black and white views. The garage, the alley, the front entrance, the roof. She tapped on the street view. The black sedan was there. 2 men were standing outside it, smoking cigarettes in the rain. One of them was Holloway. The other was a giant of a man she didn't recognize, a brute with a shaved head and a neck tattoo. "It's Holloway," she confirmed. "And a heavy." "That's Gregor," Johnny said, looking at the screen over her shoulder. "Russian freelance. He likes to break fingers before he asks questions." "How did they find us?" Elenya asked, panic rising in her throat. "You said this place was off the books." "The car," Johnny realized, hitting the mattress with his fist. "Newer cars have GPS trackers built in for insurance. If Holloway ran your plates, he pinged the car's LoJack system. We led them right to the door." Elenya felt the blood drain from her face. "I drove us into a trap." "No," Johnny said, his voice turning cold and calculating. "You brought them to my kill box, but I need to be able to stand to use it." He looked at her. "Elenya, I need you to go to the safe in the closet. The combination is 22 right, 05, left 55 right." Elenya ran to the walk-in closet. She moved the false panel behind a row of hanging suits and found the wall safe. She spun the dial. Click. The heavy door swung open. Inside there were stacks of cash passports and enough weaponry to start a small war. "What do I grab?" she called out. "The adrenaline shot," Johnny yelled. "Red cap and the MP5. Can you use a submachine gun?" Elenya stared at the sleek black weapon. "I'm a waitress, Johnny." "I pour coffee." "It's point and shoot," he growled from the other room. "Bring it." She grabbed the adrenaline pen and the heavy gun, rushing back to the bed. Johnny snatched the pen. He didn't hesitate. He jammed it into his thigh, right through his suit trousers. He gasped a sharp intake of breath as the chemical surged through his system, forcing his heart rate up, overriding the pain signals, diluting the morphine. It was dangerous, borderline suicidal with his blood loss, but it would buy him 30 minutes of functionality. He swung his legs over the bed and stood up. He swayed, gripped the nightstand, and then steadied himself. He checked the magazine of the Sig Sauer. then racked the slide of the MP5 Elenya handed him. "Stay here," he ordered. "Lock the door behind me." "No," Elenya said. She grabbed a small handgun from the waistband of his discarded trousers, the one he had earlier. It was heavy in her hand. "I'm not waiting to die. If they get past you, they get to me." Johnny looked at her. For a second, the mask of the ruthless Mafia Don slipped, and she saw a flicker of admiration. "Stay behind me," he said, "and cover your ears. It's going to get loud." They moved into the living area. The lights were off, the room illuminated only by the city glow outside. Bzzz. The intercom by the door buzzed. Johnny Holloway's voice came through, distorted and smug. "We know you're in there. Open up, and maybe I don't let Gregor play with the girl." Johnny moved silently to the kitchen island, using the marble countertop as cover. He gestured for Elenya to hide behind the thick velvet sofa. "I'm disappointed, Detective," Johnny shouted back, his voice surprisingly strong. "I thought you were smart. You came to my house without a warrant. I don't need a warrant for a dead man." Holloway laughed. "You're right," Johnny muttered to himself. He looked at a control panel on the wall near the kitchen. "Elenya," he whispered, "when I say now, cover your eyes. What flashbangs wired into the entryway? Anti-intrusion system. You have flashbangs wired into your ceiling. Paranoia keeps you alive." He smirked grimly. A loud thud shook the heavy steel front door. Then the sound of a drill. They were boring through the lock. Johnny raised the MP5. He waited. His breathing was steady, controlled. He was in his element now. The wounded animal was gone. The predator was back. The drill whined. Then a heavy clank. The door swung open. Two silhouettes filled the frame. "Now!" Johnny roared. Elenya ducked her head and squeezed her eyes shut. Boom crack. A blinding white light seared through her eyelids, followed by a deafening bang that shook the floorboards. "Ah!" Holloway screamed. Johnny was up. He didn't just fire blindly. He moved with terrifying precision. Thwip, thwip, thwip. The MP5 was suppressed, making only soft mechanical coughing sounds. Glass shattered. Wood splintered. Elenya peeked over the sofa. Holloway was on the ground, clutching his eyes. Gregor the giant was stumbling blindly, firing a massive revolver wildly into the room. A bullet tore through the sofa inches from Elenya's head, sending a cloud of stuffing into the air. She screamed, scrambling backward. Gregor turned toward the sound. He couldn't see, but he could hear. He raised the revolver toward her. "No!" Johnny shouted. He broke cover, exposing himself to get a clear shot. Gregor fired. The bullet hit Johnny in the shoulder, his good shoulder. He spun around, dropping the submachine gun, falling hard to the floor. "Johnny!" Elenya cried out. Gregor wiped his streaming eyes, a cruel smile forming on his face as his vision cleared. He saw Johnny down. He saw the girl. "Game over," Gregor grunted, stepping over Holloway's writhing body. He walked toward Johnny, raising the gun for a kill shot. Elenya looked at the small pistol in her hands. Her father's voice echoed in her head. "Breathing is aiming L. Exhale. Squeeze, don't pull." She stood up. She wasn't trembling anymore. The fear had crystallized into a cold, hard point in her stomach. "Hey!" she shouted. Gregor turned. Elenya exhaled. She squeezed the trigger. Bang! The shot went wide, hitting a vase. Gregor laughed, turning fully toward her. "You missed, sweetheart." "I wasn't aiming at you," she said breathlessly. Gregor paused. He looked up. The bullet had shattered the glass casing of the heavy industrial chandelier right above his head. The support cable, already frayed from age, snapped with a metallic twang. Gregor looked up just in time to scream as 300 pounds of iron and crystal crashed down on him. The room fell silent, save for the ringing in Elenia's ears and Halloway's whimpering near the door. Elenia ran to Johnny. He was conscious, clutching his shoulder, staring at the pile of debris that used to be a Russian hitman. "You!" Johnny coughed, blood staining his teeth. "You dropped a chandelier on him." "It seemed effective," she panted, dropping to her knees beside him. "Where are you hit?" "Shoulder. Through and through." "I'll live." He looked at the door. Halloway was trying to crawl away. Johnny pushed himself up. His face was pale as death, but his eyes were burning. He limped over to Halloway, kicking the detective onto his back. Halloway looked up. His face burned from the flashbang eyes watering. "Johnny, wait. Marco made me do it." Johnny looked down at him. There was no mercy in his face, only exhaustion. "Marco Rossi made a mistake," Johnny said softly. "He sent a sheep to kill a wolf." Johnny raised his boot and stomped down hard on Halloway's hand, the one reaching for his fallen gun. Halloway screamed. "We're leaving," Johnny said to Elenia. "This place is burned. The gunshot reports will bring the real police in 5 minutes." "Where can we go?" Elenia asked, despair creeping back in. "They know my car. They know your safe house." Johnny looked at her, then at the dead giant under the chandelier and the moaning detective. He reached into Halloway's pocket and pulled out a set of car keys. "We take their car," Johnny said, "and we go to the one place Marco won't look." "Where is that?" "His own house," Johnny said, a dark, terrifying smile touching his lips. "It's time I formally announced my retirement." Elenia helped him toward the door, stepping over the wreckage of her former life. She realized then that the woman who cleaned coffee stains at Miller's diner was gone. In her place was someone who dropped chandeliers on hit men and stitched up Mafia bosses. And as terrifying as it was, she realized she didn't want to go back. The rain had finally stopped, leaving Seattle glistening like a jagged diamond in the dark. Inside Detective Halloway's unmarked sedan, the silence was thick, broken only by the rhythmic thump-thump of the tires on the asphalt and Johnny's labored breathing. Elenia drove, her hands still stained with grease from the diner and dust from the warehouse, gripped the steering wheel of the very car that had been hunting them. "You're going into shock," Elenia said, glancing at Johnny. His skin was the color of ash, and the adrenaline shot was beginning to wear off, leaving behind a tidal wave of exhaustion. "I'm fine," Johnny lied, checking the magazine of Halloway's gun. "Just keep driving north. Exit 172, the Lake Washington estate." "Marco's house." Elenia shook her head. "Johnny, this is suicide. We have one gun, you have 2 bullet holes in you, and I'm wearing a waitress uniform that smells like old fryer oil. We aren't exactly dressed for a house call." "We aren't going to knock on the front door," Johnny murmured, his eyes closed. "Tonight is the Winter Solstice Gala. Marco hosts it every year. It's a masquerade. 300 guests. Politicians, judges, cartel leaders. All hiding behind masks." He turned his head slowly to look at her. "It's the perfect cover. But you're right. We need to change." He directed her to a nondescript dry cleaning shop in the University District. It looked closed, the windows dark, but when Johnny limped to the door and tapped a specific rhythm on the glass, 2 slow, 3 fast, the lights flickered on. An elderly man with a tape measure around his neck opened the door. He didn't look surprised to see a bleeding Mafia don and a terrified waitress. He just sighed. "Mr. Vesper, I see the retirement didn't take. Hello, Silas. I need a tuxedo and a gown for the lady. Something distracting. And the blood, Silas asked, gesturing to Johnny's ruined shirt. Do you have the back room prepped? Always. The next hour was a blur of agonizing efficiency. Silas, who Elenya realized was far more than a tailor, helped her clean Johnny's wounds and redress them with professional-grade bandages. He gave Johnny another injection, a stimulant cocktail that made Johnny's pupils dilate and his jaw clench, but it forced him to stand upright. Then came the clothes. Silas handed Elenya a gown of emerald green silk. It was backless, plunging deep with a slit that went up to her hip. It was elegant, expensive, and terrifying. Why this? Elenya asked, holding it up. Because, Johnny said, his voice regaining its dangerous baritone as he buttoned a crisp white shirt over his bandages. Marco is arrogant. He won't be looking for a threat. He'll be looking for his victory. We need to walk in through the front door right under his nose. And to do that, you need to look like you belong on the arm of a ghost. When Elenya stepped out of the changing room, the transformation was complete. The grease was gone, her hair was pinned up in an elegant chignon, and the green dress clung to her like water. She looked like a queen of the underworld. Johnny, dressed in a midnight blue tuxedo that hid the bulk of his bandages, stopped adjusting his cufflinks. He stared at her. For a moment, the hardened killer vanished, replaced by a man struck dumb. Do I pass? Elenya asked, her voice trembling slightly. Johnny walked over to her. He reached out his hand, hovering near her cheek before he pulled back. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a black Venetian mask with silver filigree. He tied it gently around her head. You don't just pass, Elenya, he whispered, the intimacy of the moment charging the air between them. You're the most dangerous thing I'm bringing into that house. He strapped a small, pearl-handled pistol, Silas's contribution to her thigh, beneath the slit of the dress. If anyone touches you, Johnny said, his eyes locking onto hers through the eye holes of his own black mask. You don't ask for permission. You put them down. The Rossi estate was a fortress disguised as a palace. Situated on the cliffs overlooking Lake Washington, it was a sprawling architecture of glass and steel. The driveway was lined with Bentleys and Rolls-Royces. Valets in white jackets were parking cars. Act bored, Johnny instructed, as they pulled Halloway's sedan, now with stolen plates provided by Silas, up to the valet stand. You've seen this 1,000 times. You own the world. Don't look at the guards. Look through them. They stepped out. The cool night air hit Elenya's bare skin, but she didn't shiver. Johnny offered his arm. His grip was firm, grounding her. They walked up the grand staircase. Security was tight. Men with earpieces scanned the crowd. Invitation, a burly guard asked, blocking their path. Johnny didn't break stride. He reached into his jacket, but not for a card. He flashed a platinum coin with a wolf insignia embossed on it. The guard's eyes widened. He stiffened, glancing at Johnny's masked face, then at the coin. It was a marker, an old code among the families. High-level clearance. Apologies, sir, the guard muttered, stepping aside. Enjoy the evening. They entered the ballroom. It was a sea of color and noise. A string quartet played in the corner. Chandeliers the size of cars hung from the vaulted ceiling. Hundreds of masked figures laughed, drank, and conspired. Keep moving, Johnny murmured near her ear. Marco will be in the solarium. It's his favorite place to hold court. They moved through the crowd like sharks in a reef. Elenya felt eyes on her, on the dress, on the mystery of her presence, but she focused on Johnny. He was moving with a fluid grace that defied his injuries, though she could feel the heat radiating from him. the fever fighting against the drugs. "Johnny!" a voice called out. Elenya froze. A man in a gold mask stepped in front of them. He held a champagne flute. "I haven't seen you in months," the man slurred. "I thought you were dead." Johnny tilted his head. "Senator, I'm simply reallocated." "And who is this?" The senator leered at Elenya. "Someone you can't afford," Johnny said icily. "Excuse us." He steered her away, his grip tightening. "We're running out of time. The pain meds are peaking. I have about 20 minutes before I crash." They reached the double doors of the solarium. 2 guards stood there. These weren't hired muscle. They were Marco's personal elite. They carried submachine guns under their jackets. "Plan B," Johnny whispered. "What's Plan B?" "You distract. I disable." Elenya took a deep breath. She let go of Johnny's arm and walked straight toward the guards. She swayed her hips, putting on a performance of drunken elegance. "Excuse me, boys," she slurred, slightly stumbling as she reached them. "I think I lost my earring. Right? Here." She dropped to her knees in front of them, patting the floor. The guards looked down, distracted for exactly 1 second. That was all Johnny needed. He moved like a blur. He grabbed the back of the first guard's head and slammed it into the door frame with a sickening crack. As the second guard reached for his weapon, Johnny stepped in close, driving a knife taken from the buffet table into the man's throat. It was silent, brutal, fast. Johnny caught the second guard as he fell, dragging him into the shadows of a potted palm. Elenya stood up, her heart hammering against her ribs. She looked at Johnny. He was wiping blood off his hands with a silk handkerchief. "You're terrifying," she whispered. "I'm motivated," he corrected. He pushed the solarium doors open. Inside the room was a jungle of exotic plants, humid and warm. In the center, sitting on a leather chair like a throne, was Marco Rossi. He was unmasked. He was younger than Johnny, handsome, in a cruel, polished way, sipping a glass of dark amber liquid. He didn't look surprised. "I wondered when you'd show up, Johnny," Marco said, swirling his drink. "I had a bet with Holloway. He said you'd die in the diner. I said you were too stubborn to die anywhere but at my feet." Johnny walked into the light, pulling the mask from his face and dropping it onto the tiled floor. It clattered loudly. "Where is Holloway?" Marco asked, feigning concern. "He had a disagreement with a chandelier," Johnny said, his voice level. He raised the MP5 he had taken from the unconscious guard outside. "It's over, Marco. Sign the transfer papers. Give me the exit strategy you stole, and maybe I let you live." Marco laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. He stood up, placing his glass on a side table. "You think this is about the money, Johnny? You think I sent a hit squad to a diner for assets?" Marco walked slowly around the table. He wasn't armed, or at least he didn't appear to be. He looked at Elenya, who was standing by the door, the small pistol in her hand aimed at his chest. "And you brought a guest?" Marco smiled. "The waitress, Elenya Vance." Elenya's breath hitched. "You know my name." "I know everything about you, Elenya," Marco said softly. "I know about your student loans. I know about your eviction notice. I know about your father." Johnny stepped forward, interposing himself between Marco and Elenya. "Leave her out of this. This is between us." "Is it?" Marco's eyes gleamed with malice. "You see, Johnny, you're a man of code, a man of honor. You believe that the world has rules." Marco pressed a button on his desk. Suddenly, floodlights blinded them from the glass ceiling above. Red laser dots danced across Johnny's chest and Elena's forehead. Snipers, perched on the balcony above. "Drop the guns," Marco commanded. Johnny hesitated. He looked at the lasers. He looked at Elena. With a heavy sigh, he lowered the MP5 and set it on the floor. Elena followed suit, her hands shaking. "Good," Marco purred. "Now let's have that dinner for two you were so desperate for." He gestured to two chairs set up in the middle of the room. Guards emerged from the shadows, forcing Johnny and Elena to sit. Johnny was deteriorating. The adrenaline was fading, and the blood loss was catching up. He slumped slightly in the chair, sweat beading on his forehead. "Why, Marco?" Johnny wheezed. "We were brothers. I raised you in this life. You held me back." Marco roared, his composure cracking for a second. "You wanted to legitimize. You wanted to go straight. Soft. Just like Isabella wanted." At the mention of his dead wife's name, Johnny stiffened. "Don't say her name." "Why?" "Because it hurts." Marco walked closer, leaning down so his face was inches from Johnny's. "You think Isabella's death was an accident, don't you? A drive-by meant for you that went wrong." Johnny said nothing, his jaw working. "It wasn't an accident, Johnny. I ordered it." The silence in the room was absolute. Even the air conditioning seemed to stop humming. "You..." Johnny's voice was a low growl. "She was poisoning you," Marco spat. "She was convincing you to leave, to take the Vesper Empire and turn it into a charity. I couldn't let that happen, so I had her removed." Johnny lunged. Despite the wounds, despite the guns pointed at him, he flew out of the chair. A guard slammed the butt of a rifle into Johnny's stomach. Johnny collapsed to his knees, retching. "Stop it!" Elena screamed, struggling against the guard holding her. "But here is the best part," Marco said, looking at Elena with a twisted delight. "The irony. The cosmic joke." He walked over to Elena, lifting her chin with a finger. She pulled away, spitting at him. "Feisty." Marco wiped his face. He turned back to Johnny, who was gasping for air on the floor. "Johnny, do you know who treated Isabella that night?" Marco asked. Johnny looked up, confusion warring with the pain. "She was shot in the lung," Marco recounted. "She could have survived. But the medic, the legendary street doctor you called, he was drunk. He botched the intubation. He let her drown in her own blood." Johnny's eyes flicked to Elena. A dawning horror began to spread across his face. "No," Johnny whispered. "Yes." Marco grinned. "The medic was Dr. Vance, Elena's father." Elena felt the world spin. That's a lie. My dad saved people. Your dad was a drunk who killed the wife of the man you're trying to save," Marco said gleefully. "I didn't send Johnny to Miller's diner by accident. I tracked you down, Elena. I knew Johnny was sentimental. I knew that on the anniversary of her death, if I pushed him toward the daughter of the man who killed her, well, I thought it would be poetic." Marco looked at Johnny. "Look at her, Johnny. Look at the woman who saved your life tonight. Her blood carries the sin that destroyed yours." Johnny stared at Elena. He looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. Betrayal, hatred, or just profound, breaking sorrow. "Elena," Johnny rasped. "Is it true? Was it Vance? I don't know." Elena stammered, tears streaming down her face. "He came home one night, 3 years ago, covered in blood. He never spoke about it. He just drank until he passed out. He never worked again. It was confirmation enough. Johnny closed his eyes. His head dropped. Beautiful. Marco clapped his hands. The betrayal is complete. Now I can kill you both with a clear conscience. Marco pulled a gold-plated Desert Eagle from his waistband. He aimed it at Johnny's head. Any last words, boss? Johnny didn't look up. He didn't look at the gun. He looked at Elenya. I don't blame her, Johnny said softly. Marco paused. What? Johnny raised his head. His eyes were burning with a renewed cold fire. The sins of the father are not the sins of the child. I know that better than anyone. Touching, Marco sneered. And stupid. Marco cocked the hammer. Goodbye, Johnny. Click. The gun didn't fire. Marco frowned. He pulled the trigger again. Click. He looked at the gun in confusion. Johnny started to laugh. It was a low, dark sound that rumbled from his chest. You forgot something, Marco, Johnny said, slowly standing up. The guards stepped back, unnerved by the resurrection of the man who should be broken. What? Marco demanded, racking the slide. The chamber was empty. You took that gun from my safe in the office upstairs, didn't you? Johnny smiled, blood staining his teeth. So, I removed the firing pins from my display collection 5 years ago, Johnny said. Paranoia keeps you alive. Arrogance gets you killed. Johnny moved. This time the guards didn't react fast enough. Johnny didn't go for Marco. He went for the light switch on the wall. He slammed his fist into the panel. The solarium plunged into darkness. Elenya, get it down! Johnny roared. The solarium plunged into absolute suffocating darkness. Panic erupted instantly. Marco screamed for lights, but the blackness was Johnny's domain. Elenya dropped to the floor, crawling over shattered glass, as the room exploded into chaos, blind gunfire, and the sickening sounds of bone meeting high-density polymer. A heavy boot stumbled over her legs. A guard reached down, grabbing her hair. Elenya didn't think. She pressed the barrel of the pearl-handled pistol into the bulk of his shadow and pulled the trigger. The muzzle flash acted like a strobe light, revealing a terrifying tableau. Johnny, a bloodied ghost in a torn tuxedo, dismantling Marco's men with the efficiency of a reaper. When the emergency amber lights finally flickered on, the silence was heavy. Elenya stood behind the massive oak desk, her gun pressed firmly against Marco Rossi's temple. Call them off, she screamed, her voice breaking. Marco, bleeding from a broken nose, shrieked, Hold fire, she has a gun to my head. Johnny stepped into the circle of dim light. He dragged his leg, dripping blood, but his eyes were calm. He looked at Elenya, not with judgment for her father's past, but with pride. Give me the gun, Elenya, he said, softly, reaching out. You're a healer. Let me be the monster. Shaking, Elenya handed him the weapon. Johnny turned to Marco, who began sobbing, offering money, offering exile. I don't want your money, Johnny said. He looked up at the balcony where red laser dots still danced on his chest. Gentlemen, he shouted to the snipers, the contract has changed. Marco Rossi is stepping down. The lasers didn't move. The snipers didn't fire. They knew a regime change when they saw one. Johnny looked back at Marco. You said my wife made me soft. She just made me human. You just let the animal back out. He didn't shoot him. He pistol-whipped Marco into unconsciousness, doused the desk in high-proof brandy, and dropped his lighter. As the flames roared to life, consuming the Rossi legacy, Johnny turned to Elenya. Come on, he whispered, leaning heavily on her. I believe I still owe you an order for 2. 6 months later. The grey rain of Seattle was a lifetime away, replaced by the golden sun of the Amalfi Coast. Elenya Vance walked onto the terrace of a cliffside villa, carrying 2 espressos. She wore white linen, her hair loose in the Mediterranean breeze. Johnny stood by the railing looking out at the sea. The shadows under his eyes were gone, replaced by a peace she hadn't thought possible. He turned, taking the tray from her. "The lawyer called," he said casually. "I bought Miller's Diner. Saul is turning it into a barbecue joint." Elenya laughed, the sound bright and free. Johnny reached into his pocket and slid a velvet box across the iron table. Inside sat a simple platinum band, inlaid with emerald. "I don't know how to be a normal man yet," Johnny admitted, his blue eyes locking onto hers. "But I know I don't want to eat alone anymore." Elenya took his hand, looking at the ring, then at the man who had burned down a kingdom to save her. "Good," she smiled. "Because the kitchen is closed. I'm retired." Johnny grinned, sliding the ring onto her finger. "So what's for dinner?" Elenya leaned in and kissed him. "Dinner," she whispered, "is for 2. And that, my friends, is the story of Elenya and Johnny. From a rainy diner in Seattle to the sun-drenched coast of Italy. They survived the Mafia, the betrayal of the past, and a burning mansion to find their happy ending. What did you think of the twist about Elenya's father? Did you think Johnny would actually forgive her? I honestly thought Marco had them in that solarium. Please do me a massive favor. Smash that like button. It helps the algorithm find more story lovers like you. Subscribe and hit the bell icon so you don't miss next week's story. I'm thinking of doing a sci-fi thriller or a royal romance next. Let me know in the comments which one you want. Share this video with a friend who loves a good Mafia romance. Thanks for listening, and remember, sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is order dinner for 2. See you in the next one.